We're going to be hosting a webinar on the Share Practices group page at 7 p.m. Eastern on June 17th for Matt's group coaching program and also for my own group coaching that will be offered to dental students. And you want to learn more about it, really hope to see you guys there, 7 p.m. Eastern on June 17th, the Share Practices group page. I'm super excited, and I want to hear from you all. We are back with Pursuit of Ownership. I am here with Suzanne Rassy, our esteemed Share Practices coach. I am super happy to have her on. I actually met her back at Voices of Dentistry, and she absolutely swept me off my feet and got me super psyched about coaching. She's been on the other segments that we have. I had to get her on here and have her talk about coaching pre-owners. Suzanne, how are you doing?
I am doing great, Tyler. How are you today?
It's very fast times for me. We got a whole lot of things going on here at Share Practices. I've been hearing back from dentists that I've been sending out mailers to, and we just started my first day back at school. So it's been an absolute whirlwind, and it's nice to just kind of get back on the mic and, have a casual conversation with somebody.
Exciting times indeed.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And, I got to tell you, there have been many stirrings of talking about coaching here at Share Practices, and we've been talking about it for quite some time, but there's a lot of programs that are going to be running pretty soon, and you're a really big facet of that. And so I am excited for our pre-ownership segment to get a good listen as to, how you can help out our segment of the audience. So I'm really happy to have you on.
I am super excited as well, Tyler. It's been, feels like it's been a long time in the making. And so we are finally at this point where we can start telling everybody about our secrets, basically.
Well, not all of our secrets, we hold some.
Not all of our secrets, but
yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'm curious about, and we've been doing a segment recently called Pre-Ownership Underwater, where we talk to pre-owners, of course, who are sort of in a predicament where they know they want to get into practice ownership. They've been listening to Share Practices and had people in their ear for some time about getting into ownership and all the benefits and stuff. But they oftentimes have like certain obstacles that just kind of get in the way. And a lot of times I find that those happen to be personal obstacles. And in your experience coaching, have you run into that yourself or?
Oh, you bet. Everything is important, I think, at that level, right? I mean, you're
right.
a recent grad and, thinking about practice ownership and everything seems important, doesn't it? At all levels. And so I think beginning with the end in mind may be an easy thing to talk about, but it's actually maybe more difficult to have doctors kind of think about going forward. I mean, what's ideal? I think that's one of the greatest challenges is not really knowing what you're looking for. What's that ideal scenario? So I think that's one of the challenges that I often hear. That's pretty common with doctors.
Yeah, I hope that we're not starting to sound like a broken record because we always talk about finding the right practice for you. I mean, we talk about it. I mean, I know we've talked about it hundreds of times on the show, but I'm kind of getting to that spot in my own personal journey, and I'm looking at practices and trying to find the right one. It's got to be in the right place, and I got to have the right number of ops and all these things. And you can talk about it and you can understand it and you can repeat it, but when you really get down and dirty with it, and you get down to the brass tacks, and you're looking at, okay, like I really need to purchase the right practice. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, and you have to have clarity of vision to do it. You have to know yourself as a person, as a dentist, and have some idea of the person you're hoping to be over the next 10, 15 years, whatever it may be. And so in another sense, I feel like we can't talk enough about it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. I think when you're looking at what is important and really starting off with that vision, I think that part of it is key. And then really creating that support team. Do you have a support team of people that are surrounding you? CPA, banker, attorney, a coach, basically. And then kind of looking at what that long-term vision is really going to look like. I think many start off with that, well, I'll fix it later type mindset, or, looking at it more of a short term. I want to practice, I want it now. And so I think
Yeah.
when we're looking at how we can best advise doctors, I think just saying, hey, mapping out the vision is going to save you some time, probably some heartache and some money down the road. So
Right.
it's worth taking the time to really evaluate. And you're right, we can't say it enough. We can't spell it out in enough ways, but that.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem to me that it's more prevalent that people will seek out consultation or coaching after they've already purchased a practice because they want to get information about how to lower their overhead or manage staff or raise production, get new patients in, something like that. But it's like so many of those factors are already kind of baked in when you purchase a practice, and if you have that sort of clarity and you know where you're trying to get to and you can identify opportunities that are going to facilitate you getting there quicker and more efficiently, and especially if you have some help in that part of the process, you can really save yourself a lot of trouble, I think.
Oh, you bet. I think business acumen is a big thing too, Tyler.
Yeah.
You'd probably agree that you got the great clinician, the hands-on experience, but the business
Right.
experience may be something that you can look to a coach for help
Yeah.
with. So I think that part of it as well is just acknowledging that it's okay. You don't have all the answers, but acknowledging that you need the help, I think, is the important part.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with personal growth as well. I think there is a certain dentist archetype that we have where we're oftentimes people that have excelled through our life, at least academically, and we're just not really used to a acknowledging that we need help and b actually being humble enough to ask for it. So that's personally been an issue for me in the past, and thankfully I'm starting to overcome it. Still have my own obstacles, but I do think that seeking out coaching is kind of a marker for personal growth as well as precipitant of professional growth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We all have our blind spots, whether it's in the practice or definitely
Yeah,
in our lives. So
yeah, yeah. Well, it's definitely my hope that in people listening to this segment and being in their pre-ownership stage, they kind of take charge and go ahead and reach out to coaches, even if it's not with share practices, just somebody that can help you along the way. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't go with share practices, but hey, to each their own.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So, Suzanne, if you could kind of help me out and help the listeners understand a little bit about what a coach can really do in that pre-ownership stage. I mean, obviously, we've already talked about sort of formulating that vision, but what other sorts of leaps and bounds can be made?
Yeah, absolutely. So the aspiring owner definitely going through, like we talked about, the exercise of what kind of practice they want ultimately. Um, I think the coaches help from an accountability standpoint. I think us as coaches all helping our doctors stick to their vision, right? It
Sure.
removes them from that emotional side. Sometimes you get caught
Right.
up in the emotion of what the practice looks like or where it's located or
Sure.
what the patient base is, and you kind of talk yourself into that practice. And I think as coaches
Yeah.
we really help our doctors just stay grounded and stick to their vision.
Yeah.
And then I think we mentioned a lot of key things, Tyler, on this episode that I think are going to be great takeaways. But the due diligence process, let's not discount the importance of that and the really
Mhm.
understanding what the practice looks like. Just from a coaching standpoint, if I'm working with someone who is aspiring to purchase a practice and we kind of look at the nitty gritty, I want to look at a couple of things that are really important. And I kind of look at the mouth. I kind of look at the practice just as a doctor would look at a mouth in quadrants. So if I
Right.
were to kind of look at those quadrants, I think we're talking the same language here.
Yeah.
If I look at that approach, I'm looking at what the facility looks like. Is it matching the doctor's vision? We're looking at the patient base too. We're looking at what the existing patient base is, what
Mhm.
the new patient flow is,
Sure.
um, and then the cash flow of the practice. Is it cash flowing? And the last part of that is the schedule. What's our ability
Yeah.
to fill the schedule? What kind of procedures the previous owner is doing. So is all of that kind of mapping out to what the doctor's vision looks like? And all of those 4 areas, all those quadrants really need to support that. We're looking
Right.
for opportunities for growth.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that it seems to me that, someone that would come to you can kind of bring to the table, a point A being where they're at and a point B where they want to be. And if they don't quite have a clear point B, you can probably help them with that too. But you're essentially helping them get from point A to point B and sort of helping them along the way and being that sort of objective, devil or angel, whatever is necessary on their shoulder to kind of, guide them through that process. Because I think it's super easy to just get amped up whenever there's someone willing to sell to you and to look at it. And maybe it's got great signage or there's just certain aspects of it that just sort of have reflections of what your vision is. And you just kind of get romanticized and you put on these rose colored glasses and you're trying to think of a million different ways that you can make certain red flags work for you. And then you kind of need somebody to kind of bring you back down to earth and say, hey, it's all right. We can wait for another one. Or, if you really want to go with this, we can work with it. But let's not be rash. So I think it's extremely important that you have somebody by your side that has that kind of experience to help you along with it.
Right. You just described probably my favorite saying, bridging the gap between intention and execution. I love that.
Absolutely. Just super important. And when you look at the difference that can make, even just financially, the argument for coaching is, a pretty obvious one. And, if it even makes a slight difference, it can usually offset whatever cost that, people may be balking at first. And I think maybe sometimes that's a hard thing for people because it's one thing to ask for help, from like a mentor or something like that. But it's another sometimes to shell out what may seem like a large amount of money of, upfront cost. And I just think it's important to really take in the big picture of things and understand that this is for the purpose of you attaining that vision in a not so messy way. So it's just something to think about, I think.
Right. Avoiding those pitfalls of either wasted time, wasted money,
Right.
or, both, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm curious for people in the pre-ownership stage, when should they really approach a coach to help them out with that? I mean, what should they be bringing to the table?
I think that's a good question. Um, looking at the opportunity that they're looking at, if something comes their way, then I think that's the point at which they can reach out. But for some, you mentioned coaching on the vision. I mean, I think that's an important key
Right.
factor as well. Like we've been talking about, is if that vision isn't outlined and clearly defined, then having the coach help with that aspect is really important. So, I mean, I work with doctors that really are just graduating and are kind of saying, I don't really know what I don't know yet. I don't really know what
Yeah.
I want, and doing that exercise to really help them. And I work with other doctors that really are very clear on what they want going forward, but the fact of the matter is they're not sure if that's the right practice for them.
Right.
So I think when you at least at a minimum have a practice that you're interested in, then
Yes.
I think that's the point at which you're going to surround yourself with that solid team. You're going to reach out to a CPA, you're going to reach out to a banker, you're going to reach out to an attorney, you're going to reach out to a coach. So you've got all those bases covered.
Right. So, in terms of sort of establishing that vision, just like you talked about, what are some of the high points that someone should really know for themselves in terms of what they're looking for in a practice? Like, what are the most important factors in your mind?
Well, I think that's a loaded question to a
Of
certain
course it
degree.
is. I like those.
You like those loaded questions, right?
I do. I do.
But
Less
but
work for me.
well, and the reason I say that's a loaded question is because I think it just depends on what it is they are looking for. I don't think one size
Okay.
fits all, right? So,
Right.
what should they be looking for? Well, you kind of get a sense of whether or not you're looking for a larger practice, a smaller practice, whether or not you want to be a solo, whether it's a multi-doctor. I mean, I think to that degree, you're kind of mapping that out as you move forward with where it is you want to live and all those other details. But from the perspective of what should they be looking at, or what should they be kind of outlining, I think that's pretty personal to
Okay.
different doctors.
Yeah, I see. So I'm thinking in terms of, when we say how big of a practice, does that necessarily mean revenue? Does it mean ops? Does it mean number of hygienists? What are some of the important differentiators that can like really kind of help the process along of finding the right opportunity?
Well, I think if you're looking for that long-term vision and you're kind of looking at, infinite time frame, um,
Yeah,
knowing first and foremost, if you're wanting to be a multi-doctor practice and you're looking at larger facility, you're looking at larger patient base, something you can share. Are you joining a practice or are you purchasing a practice and going to grow it for it to become a multi-doctor practice?
yes.
So you're looking at certain factors that are really determining solo versus multi, if you will.
Okay. Okay. That's good. So we've been through this before, but I always like to get different perspectives from people. So you're talking a lot about solos and groups. What are some key characteristics that can sort of help someone differentiate whether, they're a better fit for being the solo doc or in a group practice environment?
And I know you've talked to Matt and George a lot about this.
I
Just
have.
from just on the air too, our listeners have heard them just personally talk about, George and his situation, and Matt and his situation, basically in his
Yes.
practice. So I think it definitely is, from a personal standpoint, just a solo practitioner just likes being, the only person maybe calling the shots. Those
Sure.
could be determining factors. A solo doctor also the opportunity to kind of grow that practice from the inside out, and leading the team from that perspective.
And so you touch on an interesting subject there with regards to leadership and helping out pre-owners that are at that stage that haven't quite, bought into the practice and, sort of coaching them along with that. So how do you kind of help people out when they're at that stage?
The fact of the matter is, reaching out to a coach early on tells me, like, you're wanting to work on something, you're wanting to grow, you're kind of already on that right path to leadership. So that's pretty
Right.
exciting. But from a coach and student kind of standpoint, I think the coach can help assess. I think a coach can really help identify certain skills and certain strengths that may be
Yeah.
there, but offer some guidance, to further develop those skills. So if,
Yeah.
for example, you're not someone that sees that you've got certain traits as a leader, or
Hmm.
what kind of skills will help, I think the coach will help you identify those and bring those to light, make those stronger. And on the flip side, identifying certain areas that are maybe more challenging for you,
Right.
offer guidance on dealing with those areas. Is it, how are we going to work on those to kind of strengthen those and become more of a leader? And I'm a strong proponent of leaders growing other leaders. So I think if a doctor's going to start a practice and really wanting to grow that practice, and really wanting to grow the team as well, just really investing in themselves, I think
Yeah.
is the first place to start.
Right. Now, that all sounds great, and I think that when there are people, that recognize that they have weaknesses and they're willing to search out that help, I think it's an amazing thing. But I gotta have to kind of speak from a personal space here. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been engaging with coaching fairly recently in my life and have made absolute leaps and bounds that I really didn't know that I had to make. And I've kind of found out that, at the start, I didn't really sound like that person you just described. Like I was not really aware of all these weaknesses that I had. I just sort of took it on faith that there were some that I wasn't aware of that could be worked on and improved. And I found out that was exactly the case. So I think something I really want to speak to is there's a lot of people out there, I think, like me, who for, you know, allegedly financial reasons or other personal reasons will be kind of obdurate about reaching out and getting help and saying that they want a coach because in a way maybe that's admitting they have a weakness or making them feel like less when they go and search out help. I don't know if that really speaks to our audience, but can you talk a little bit about some of those people that don't really think they need coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the big issue is, it's hard to look within. right? It's really
Right.
hard to, you mentioned that. I mean, maybe for alleged financial reasons, or just you kind of think, okay, when I'm reading this book, I see myself in this book and I'm comfortable. I think I'm good at these things. But I
Yeah.
think just taking the leap and saying, okay, let's take it from the perspective of, I want to build a practice. I want to make sure I've got that checklist of all of the things that are going to help me grow that practice
Right.
and grow the practice that I've been dreaming about. Having an outside person looking on the inside and saying, okay,
Yeah.
have you done this? Have you done that? What is your vision? I think just taking that leap to incorporate someone from the outside in your practice. I think you probably will agree, and probably have agreed, that there's a definite benefit to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I consider myself a pretty introspective person. I'm always sort of questioning where my strengths and weaknesses are. And I felt that I had a really good grasp on that. And then I engaged in coaching, and there's this system of accountability where someone's asking you these questions to define your vision, define the obstacles that you have, define your goals. And they expose chinks in your armor that your biases kind of hid you from. And I can just say from personal experience, like I was like totally against doing coaching myself and found out that that made me the perfect candidate for it. So I really do feel strongly about people sort of just taking that leap of faith and assuming that there are areas that they can improve, and realizing that the circumstances and the walls that we throw up, be they financial or whatever, are often sort of just defense mechanisms against addressing those concerns. Like that's been my experience with it, and I think a lot of people that engage in coaching will feel the same way. Now, like what I'm saying is sort of specific to life coaching, I think, but I mean, I think it translates even in the realm of going into a transition. Like when you're with a good coach, when you're with someone that's experienced and understands those elements and can implement them in talking to you about what sort of practice you're looking to have, like that's an invaluable skill and it's an invaluable service, and it's going to pay dividends later on. It's going to make sure that you're getting into the opportunity that you believe you want that's going to be suited for you. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think what exactly what you're talking about, Tyler, is ringing to those pre-owners who are definitely saying, I have so much I have to spend. Where do I spend it? What's
Right.
what's the
Of
best
course.
investment of my time? What's the best investment of my energy, my money? And
Yeah.
so I think you've said some really good points in terms of speaking out to those younger doctors who are thinking about, should I do this, or is this kind of do I need to get a practice first, or do I need to,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that the people, especially some of those people that are sort of getting after it kind of early on in their careers, they're the type to, they're self-starters and they're DIY people, and they read self-help books and they work on themselves, and they kind of feel like they're their own coaches already. So like what do they need a coach for? And when they're thinking, just as you said, like in terms of ROI, like is this worth spending my money on? I think a lot of people kind of fall into the trap of saying, well, I'll do coaching at some point, but I'll do it once I'm making more money, like once I'm in practice. But really, there's actually a lot to be said for doing it prior to that, because you want to. I think you should engage in coaching while your opportunities are many, and while you have more choices. Because if you do it after you've already purchased the practice, you've already restricted avenues that you could do to change the situation you're in. So I think it's actually really, really critical that you do it at that early stage, in my opinion.
Right. And you hit the ground running when you actually have a practice. You have so much to
For
concentrate on
sure.
at that point in time, where often that's, again, another thing that you put aside, just because when you purchase a practice, there's so much to do right from the get
Oh
go.
my God. Yeah.
And the stress level that's there. It's kind of like one of those, it's never the right time. So why not do it
Yeah.
before you embark on this journey? And you're just kind of paving that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to assume that in the future there will be less opportunity costs for
Sure.
you to engage in coaching, but I think people find out that that's just not true at all. Personally, being in school, I felt that engaging in coaching was just not even an option. That was like a dentist thing that was after graduation. And, it would require a smaller portion of my income to engage in it. But I'm finding that, I'm not thinking about, oh, should I have done it now as opposed to a year from now. I'm thinking about, well, what would have happened if I'd done it like a year ago, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
How much
And
further along would you be, right?
yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of
Right.
mad at myself now. Like the amount of change that's happened in a very short time is insane. So
Hey,
um,
the time was now. It was the right time. So,
yeah,
no looking
exactly.
back.
No, exactly right. Like I can't be so retrospective about it, but um, at the same time, that it's just something I really want to communicate to our audience is just like the validity of coaching. And obviously, there might be a lot of services out there that aren't so good, that aren't such a good return on your investment, and maybe the interest is not so much in you making sure that you're following through your goals and stuff. But I do feel that what you're offering in the background that you have really should support the feeling that it's a necessary service. I really feel that way. For those people that are still holding out about going to coaching, let's say they just don't want to do it, like for whatever reason, they're just not going to cross that bridge. What are some things that you kind of have for people, those sorts of DIY types that are just going to be super stubborn about it and say, you know what, I'm not going to do a coach? Like, what would you say they like have to have in check prior to going into that transition?
Yeah, I think let's give our audience some tips and
Yeah, sure, sure.
things to think about.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, purchasing a practice has many different facets, and there are many approaches to going about this. But some of the common things that I want to help our audience avoid, like some of the pitfalls that arrive. Here's one of the most common things that, and unfortunately, I only hear about this when the doctor has already purchased the practice and is asking me for help. Is this due diligence process? I think
right.
that's one of the DIYs that I hear a lot of. They just don't do due diligence, and they go into this and purchase a practice and then call me up and say, help. I didn't know that I had no patients, or I didn't know that I purchased this practice that, was high, state funded programs or low cash flow. So I
Yeah,
think that on the top of my list is do the due diligence. I mean, if there's one thing that happens, is make sure that you really understand what it is that you're purchasing. Let's just talk about patient base for a second. That can
please.
be super misleading. um, seller doesn't know how to pull the data out of the software, kind of just gets a report that someone pulls out and says, here, you've got 5,000 patients. So you think when you're going into this purchase, oh my gosh, this is a
I'm
gold mine.
set. What am I
Hey,
going to do with all these patients?
exactly. So this is
Yeah,
a gold mine, but then you really dig into it and you find out you've got 1,000 patients that have been in the last, say, 18 months, which
right.
is right worlds difference. So, I mean, 1,000 patients is a great patient base. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that that's not a good patient base to start off with, but it's very different than what you were told, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
so what you thought you were buying and what you actually purchased is two different things. So patient base is one of those things, and new patient flow. You ask a doctor how many new patients they get, and everybody thinks, oh yeah, 30 new patients a month. Is that true? Where are these new patients coming from? And I think the due diligence also allows you to really understand cash flow, doing a cash flow analysis there. What's the overhead? What is actually take home? Because a good CPA between us, Tyler, and everybody else, a good CPA makes sure that our profit and loss statement reflects, the way from the perspective of tax breaks, right? And so
Right. Yeah.
sometimes just looking at a pure P&L, I mean, you get the perspective of, yeah, okay, this looks good on paper, and then you go in and you really realize that it's a totally different story. So I think that first thing on the list is due diligence. Okay,
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. It's funny as you go through all those things that need to be attended to, like the whole situation just kind of sounds like there's just landmines there, and you're just like tripping around, like trying to make sure that, you're not missing one.
right.
Um,
Wouldn't you want somebody to hold your hand through that process and say, hey, let's do this together. Let's evaluate this practice from a standpoint of, okay, if this is your vision, let's go back to that conversation we were having at the
Absolutely.
beginning. If this is your vision, then does this practice actually suit that vision, right? Does it match that vision that you've been describing, that is maybe a 2 or 3 doctor practice, but you realize you only have 800 patients in this practice? So I mean, I think that is a worthy investment, due
Right.
diligence. And it'll help avoid some of the pitfalls that happen, or just like the heartache going into this, realizing
Yeah. And just
that,
having confidence. Yeah.
and not have to deal with some of the fallout after the fact of like an open schedule or what's going on. And so
Right.
call me ahead of the game, not after the practice is purchased.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I mean, I kind of have to put that sort of DIY mentality on trial because it's like there's so many things that have to be tended to. There's so many things that you have to know going into it, and you don't want to screw that up. And you have to ask yourself, like, what is really the value in delaying me finding those things until after I bought the practice? Why did I like? What is the gain there? Like, why are
Sure.
you gambling with that? You know what I mean? Like, because I guess I'm passionate about it because I've sort of had that mentality a while ago about like transition. Like I just didn't really think I'd actually engage with a transition coach. But I think it really goes along with the concept of delegation. Like you want to delegate certain tasks to people that have expertise in it. They're going to be best suited to do it instead of just taking on everything yourself and doing it suboptimally. Like why would you do this process suboptimally when you can delegate it to someone who is objective, who's not going to have the same biases that you do, who's done it 1,000 times and knows exactly what problems you could be running into. And they take away that sort of emotional element. Because, like, I mean, does a transition coach really care whether or not you buy a particular practice? Right?
There's
Like,
no vested interest, right? I mean,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So going into this without emotion, as you said, it kind of keeps everything pure, it keeps everybody honest.
Right,
Okay, if this is what you want, great. At the end of the day, let's move forward. You make
right.
an offer on this practice, but I'm here to remind you, this is what you told me, and this
Yeah.
is not,
Yes.
what I'm seeing in the practice, basically.
Right, because the onus on you is to deliver as a coach. It's not to make sure that this person buys the practice because you, again, like you said, you don't have vested interest. You're not getting kickback when that practice gets purchased or whatever. Like that's not your motivation at all. So Suzanne, I think we've touched on a lot of good stuff here. One thing I kind of want to wrap up with is looking forward post close. What are some things that people need to know after buying that practice? What needs to be on their mind? What should be their action items? What should they be looking at? And how is a coach
Yeah,
going to help them address that?
yeah, absolutely. A few tools, let's say some valuable tools after purchasing a practice, embarking on purchasing a practice, and you've decided and you're all ready to go, basically. Start tracking immediately. A lot of times doctors will say, I'll incorporate some kind of metric system or not, or I'll get all the information from my team or from the software that I have. But I would say put some kind of tracking mechanism in place. I love practice by numbers.
Right.
Huge fan. It takes the guessing out of it. Start tracking immediately. Keep score right from the get go.
When you start getting all that data and you start getting an objective look at the practice, what is your opinion on implementing changes and the timeline with that with a new team? When do you start coming to them and saying, hey, I'm looking at your numbers and this is what I want to change?
If you're at least tracking it, even if you feel like the team isn't on board with making those changes immediately, you're at least becoming aware. So it's, bringing an
Yeah.
awareness to light of the areas that you can be focusing on. And I think through your leadership skills coaching, and having your coach on board, you can partner on how you're going to tell the team how you're going to bring these changes to light. But I think numbers don't lie. So it's a lot easier to go into this as a new owner saying, hey, this is what the information is telling me. Let's work on this together as a team, if we're going to make a go at this. And I
Right.
think that helps actually some of the new doctors. It takes it out of the gut feeling where the new doctors are not having to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling is happening. And then you've got all this resistance from team members saying, well, no, you don't understand our world yet. Right. So I think
Right.
having the numbers in place will take away a lot of that emotion. And you may find that team members are a lot more open to the change, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the numbers don't lie is like a really great argument because um like just like you said, like, oh, I feel like there's not enough diagnosis here, or I feel like we're not reappointing people. That's a difficult argument to have because they may be biased and think, oh no, I always, we reappoint people, they always come back, but they don't see the leaky bucket that you do, and you can show them that with the numbers and they can take ownership of it that way. and provide tracking. And that's just so instrumental to making goals and stuff like that. And obviously, like, people want to see, I think people want to see you take that charge early on and not just be going off feeling. I think that's encouraging, in a leader.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Contrary to popular belief, I think people really do. Um, I mean, I get that from team members all the time. Like, I wish my doctor, made certain decisions. Um,
Yeah.
People don't really follow someone who's wishy-washy. So
Yeah.
again, that goes back to your leadership coaching. If being indecisive or not
Hmm.
necessarily having those tough conversations, if that's tough for you, then that's what your coach is going to help you with, right? So
Yeah.
I think from that perspective, people do, as you said, they intrinsically want someone to kind of guide.
Hmm.
And so these numbers put all of that to light, and it's not about, oh, you're a new doctor, you don't know that we're really great at this area. Well, it'll, and I think co-discovery with the team as you're going through this process, I think
Right.
really helps build that strong team. You're discovering this information together. You don't know, you're the new doc coming on board, and they kind of feel like their world is perfect, right?
Yes.
So everybody's sitting down together and kind of discovering that these are the areas of opportunity that you're all seeing together. I think is beneficial and helpful in just team development.
Yeah, and I think that could be mutually beneficial. And I want to speak to what you said about, appearing to be a decisive leader. I think that there's a big difference between someone that, goes off on a CE trip and they come back and it seems like, what they learn. And then they're like, oh, well, I heard that we need more new patients. Like, that's super important. That's very different from someone that is actually looking at numbers and says, yeah, so this is our new patient flow. It's not really supporting the office. We need to bump it up, and I want to do this and that. And like, I have an action plan, and this is what I need all of you to do. Like, that's a very different impression of the person that's come into the office. And I think I kind of doubt people will be intimidated by that. I think actually it's quite the opposite. You have more confidence in someone's ability to lead and look at things objectively and frame it in a mutually beneficial way. Because usually when you're trying to push these numbers and make things more efficient, at the end of the day, like, you want people to, like, you want the team to actually benefit from it. Like, it's not just going to be more money in your pocket or a better bottom line for you. It's something that's actually allowing everyone in the office to thrive more. And so I think that, personally, obviously, you don't want to come on too strong and you don't want to rock the boat, but you do want to come from a place of competence and you want to be decisive. And decisiveness is just, like, so important just for business in general. And I think a coach can definitely help you with that because they make you decisive about your vision. They make you decisive about what it is that you want, and they're always reinforcing that. So I definitely
Absolutely.
hear you on that for sure.
Absolutely. So for coming back to our tools here, I think that we've hit the nail on the second tool is work on yourself. Work on yourself as a
Yeah.
leader. And that ties into just implementing a tracking system so you can kind of see what's going on there. And I think the next step that ties into all of this is also holding people accountable too.
Right.
We just talked about jumping in and whether or not you should, if you're going to make some changes, if you have an office manager, or if you're hiring an office manager, then
Mhm.
look at team leads or office manager, hold people accountable, hire other leaders that can actually help with departments if you've got a larger practice.
Right.
So and people want to know what the score is, right? And so holding people accountable also means being able to give positive reinforcement and encourage those right behaviors. So it goes both ways, and I think people want to know how they're doing. Okay, here's what we set, or here's our reality, and together we've come up with a goal for new patients, to take your example, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like, in effect, you could take some things that you could mirror some of the things that you experienced with your coach into how you manage your own team. Is that valid?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
so. Because, I mean, ultimately, like, when you address your team, like, you have to address, their own incentives and their own core beliefs, and make sure that that what we're doing in the practice agrees with, the mission statement of the practice, or what they say that they're there for and about. And I think that coaching is a tool that you can use as a client, but in effect, you can turn that around and have sort of, I don't know, pseudo clients in your life where you're sort of coaching them through their place in your practice. So I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, leaders, good leaders develop other leaders. So
Absolutely.
as the practice grows, then you're developing other leaders within the internal team. Because you won't, as the clinician, you really won't be able to take care of everything as much as you think you will right now, or would love to think you will be able to do that. And so I think delegation, a lot of times when you say the word delegate, people, dentists think about, okay, delegating procedures or processes that are patient base related.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if it's not just a clinical delegation with whatever has to be done in the office, whether that's making sure that a particular meeting is scheduled, or whatever that delegation process is, learn to delegate, and then learn to hold people accountable, and offer positive reinforcement. And that's how you're building leaders within.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the accountability is probably the most important aspect of all that. And it kind of goes along with coaching as well, is like you're having someone else hold you accountable to the things that you say you're about. Like that's usually where coaching starts, is you make declarations about what it is that you want. And then you sort of go through this process, and then it circles back to, does this agree with what you said? Like, I'm just helping you to make sure that what you're doing agrees with what you said to begin with. And it's just, I don't know. I've had a lot of aha moments in in my experience with coaching. So like, I really want other people to experience that. And I just hope I'm able to illustrate that on air. And I really thank you for coming on and talking about what you do and what you have to offer. And really just, the whole paradigm of coaching in general is something that I've become really excited about recently. So I really appreciate your input.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Awesome. Thank you.
We're going to be hosting a webinar on the Share Practices group page at 7 p.m. Eastern on June 17th for Matt's group coaching program, and also for my own group coaching that will be offered to dental students. And you want to learn more about it, really hope to see you guys there, 7 p.m. Eastern on June 17th, the Share Practices group page. I'm super excited, and I want to hear from you all.